Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful fall day. We're happy to be back. Sorry we didn't have a video last week. We had some technical difficulties with the live stream on Sunday. So hopefully it's repaired and we'll be back on track tomorrow for you. Just to have a couple of things to go over today, our men's group will be meeting on Monday nights here at the Father's House and on Zoom if you want to be a part of that. I know they'd love to have you join them. Our ladies group is meeting at 6:30 on Thursday nights on Zoom, and we'd love to have you be a part of that. If you could, if you want to get on and have some fellowship with us, we'd love to have you join us. Today is our missions offering, so you know the drill. You can go to thefathershouse.org, click on the giving button, set it up as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can give to our missions both in Argentina and India that way also. You can mail a check to the Father's House at 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Or if you live in the local area and you'd like Pastor Carl or I to come by and pick up your tithe, we'd be happy to do that. Again, thank you for all your generosity. As all these prices continue to climb and go up, it's getting very difficult to keep this building up and running. So we appreciate every dollar that you can donate towards that. That's really all I have to cover today. So I guess I'll get off this camera and we'll get Pastor Carl on for you. Thanks.
Well, good morning, Father's House. How are you? I trust everything's going well. We're back after 2 weeks. Penny kind of mentioned that last week we were really busy, had a lot going on, and so decided not to, because of what we had going on, decided just for my energy's sake, for the most part, not to do the YouTube video. As I've gotten older, sometimes if I've got other stuff happening a day or two before and that day, it's very difficult energy-wise for me to do this video and then to have energy again on Sunday morning. Just as I've gotten older, my energy level has gone down a little bit. Not that I'm that old, but we had a busy Saturday, last Saturday, and thought better of it. But with that said, then I thought, well, gosh, everybody would be able to pick up on our live stream video. But one of our our camera switcher box wasn't working. For some reason, that setting had gotten changed or something had happened, a spike hit it. And so it took us this week to get that back up and running. And my hands were tied because I was out of town this last week in Sioux Falls, working, as you know, on a degree, and I had an in-class session that I had last week, so I was there. So needless to say, that's quite frustrating, but I understand. We're here. So anyway, with that being said, then I guess I got to take the next, 3 weeks to catch up with, the next 2 weeks to catch up with the 3 weeks of what I'm doing on Sunday morning, because I thought that, gosh, if I didn't do this. But if I had last Sunday morning would have been there, you guys that only watched the video would have been up to speed. But since that didn't, I could refer back to that. But since that didn't happen, then I'm going to have to kind of maybe go a little bit further today, and then go a little bit, try to finish it up 3 weeks and 2 weeks with you guys here online, and the 3 weeks that I'm doing in the church. So first of all, just to kind of get started, and I'll try to go pretty fast. But I'm starting to lay out again, and we talked about this, of bringing forward together a new image or in our imagination, a new image to work with as to what the ministry of Jesus, what it entailed. And so we talked about the image of that, that Jesus was the image of the Father, which he is, but the idea that he came to explain the Father to us. So it's the idea that I want to create the image before your imagination, and for you to think about theologically about the fact that Jesus' primary task was to come to explain the Father to us. He did that 2 ways: in his words, well, 3, I guess, his word, not really 2, his words and in his deeds. His words theologically teaching, and his deeds, his extension to people, and finally his death, the Easter event, his death, burial, and resurrection, which all kind of come under that. It's all a part of explaining God, explaining the Father to us. And then we've talked about, in recent weeks, we've talked about the notion and the idea of God's superabundance. the image we use there, as far as Jesus explaining the Father to us, is God's superabundance. And if you go back 2 weeks, I actually had on a different pink shirt, and I'm going to be wearing that bright pink tomorrow because this is Breast Cancer Awareness month. And as you notice, Penny had on a shirt that said Team Rack, and that was actually a team that we walked with Avon for several years. I walked, and she walked one more year than I did. But that was for raise awareness about breast cancer and cancer in general, and our need as a society and as the community, world community, to find answers for that. But we talked about the idea of God's superabundance, and you can go back, like I said, and you can kind of pick that up. And I talked about it in the end about the Syrophoenician woman who even asked for the scraps from the master's tables and what all that means. So you can go back, deal with that image. First of all, with Jesus coming to explain the Father to us, the image of the explaining the Father to us. There's a superabundance that comes out of him. Another image that we worked with is we worked with the image of the table, about community, about how much time Jesus spent teaching and interacting with people while he was reclining at the table, sharing over the table his theological thoughts and his love and his mercy. Today we're going to make a switch as we're going to be looking, and really we've talked about those things for the last over almost 10 months now. So now we're going to move into a new phase of the ministry of Jesus, or the life of Jesus. I want to work with a new image in your imagination about what it is that Christ came to do. And I think it's important because it kind of gives us an idea when we think about it as far as what it is that Jesus came to do. So we've now come to, or coming to the life now, in the life of Jesus, where his public ministry is ended. And he's now going to turn his attention towards going to Jerusalem, turn his focus to the cross. And at this time, he's going to really start developing within his followers, his Christ followers, the idea and the concepts of what it means to be a disciple. So we're going to make a pretty big turn here theologically as we move forward in these coming months. And so we're going to turn now to a scene where Jesus has taken his disciples that becomes bedrock and becomes very important. And he takes them to a place called Caesarea Philippi. Now, to start with, we talked about 2 weeks ago, if you want to go back and look at that video, that Jesus had traveled into an area into Decapolis, and he was up there where he met a Syrophoenician woman. He was on the margins of the Jewish society. So he didn't stay in the center in Galilee, but he had gone outside of Galilee, and he'd gone up into this marginal area of Tyre and Sidon, and there he found this Syrophoenician woman. And we talked about that here he was dealing with a woman that was outside the house of Israel. She wasn't a daughter of Abraham. She wasn't a Jew. And so the Jews classified her as a dog. So you can go back and look at that, as I said, but I want to move forward now to after that. It seems like the best recollection we can think of the path that Jesus took was that from there he went over to an area which was called Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi was in a mountainous area, and being in a mountainous area, there were several things that were interesting about it. First of all is the idea that it was the place, Caesarea Philippi, was known as the gateway, or the gates that were there, or there were these gates, which were really temples of idol worship that led into these caves that were hewn into the rocks, natural caves that came out of the rocks, and out of these rocks they would flow this water during springtime and different seasons of the year. And it was considered by the gods, first of all by Baal, and then by a later replacement of an Egyptian of a Greek goddess by the name of Pan. It was known as an area, she was known as the god of fertility. So first it was worship to Baal, a false god. Second, now it's the worship to a Greek god, Pan, and she was the goddess of fertility. So there was these caves that were there. And in these caves, before you entered into the caves, where they would do a lot of worship and where there was a lot of different sacrifices and different things that had happened down in the caves, that in the city of Caesarea Philippi, which was still technically in Israel, but it was again on the margins, where if you were a good Orthodox Jew, or if you were a religious person with any piety at all, that you weren't going to go there. So the first thing is, it was a place of these caves of idolatrous worship. And at the entrance to the caves, what the Greeks had done is they had built these temples to the gods where you would come in and you would worship. I'm going a little faster than I did last week in the congregation, but I wanted to give the idea. So there's this idea and this notion of this place of the caves. There were caves that were there that were used for idol worship. So it was a very corrupt place, a very dark place spiritually, also as far as morality-wise, temple prostitution going on, a lot of eating of meat sacrificed to idols, which would have been taboo for the Jewish community. And the other thing it was known for the notion that it was known as a very rocky area. So foundation stones would come out of there. So these temples that were built at the mouth of the caves, the foundations were actually from the rocks around the caves, because it was so rocky that it became the foundation for these temples that were there for pagan worship. And so Jesus is traveling there, and he's going to this place, and you have to look at it when you come up. There's this rocky area, there's a valley that's there, there's water coming down, and you're looking at these caverns or these caves that go down into the mountain with these idol worshiping temples on top of them that have foundations of stone that have been hewn out of the sides of the mountains. And it's this place that Jesus wants to go to meet with his disciples. So he's at this place where there's these false gods, these false temples, a lot of people, a lot of idolatrous worship, a lot of prostitution going on, and everything that was taboo to the Jewish lifestyle at this point. Jesus comes up to Caesarea Philippi, and we're going to pick up that encounter here in Matthew chapter 16. And I'm going to go through a couple of things, and then we'll pick it up again next week. And we're going to pick this up in verse 13 of Matthew chapter 16, and it reads as following. Now, when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he warned them. He warned the disciples that they should not tell anyone that he was the Christ. I think I'll end there for right now, for posterity's sake, and see if I can then maybe go forward today a little bit further, or pick up the rest of it next week. So he's coming to this place that we talked about of pagan idolatrous worship. The worst place that you could think of where a religious person would be. And it's almost like Jesus is sitting down, and he's maybe picked up a spot on a rock. He's got his disciples around him, and behind him are these temples and all this idol worship that's going on. And his disciples are here, and he asks them a question. Who do the people say that I am? Now, it's important that we catch the idea of the image that we're portraying here, and about what Jesus' image is in the midst of it. In the backdrop, what you see this idolatrous worship. You see the worst of the worst concerning the human condition. Everything that Jesus doesn't stand for, this place represents. And there, in this picturesque scene, he asked the disciples, who do the people say that I am? They answer, some John the Baptist, etc., all the different ways they answer. And Jesus asked a question further. Well, apart from that question, who do you say that I am? And Peter, of course, we know that he says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And at that point, then Jesus looks at Peter and he said, blessed are you, Peter Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And he says, and from now on I will call you Peter, or little stone, but upon this rock I'm going to build my church, which is really, it's a Greek word, ecclesia, or gathering or assembly of people. And upon this rock I'm going to build my church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So what is it that Jesus is conveying here as he starts to make a turn in his ministry? Well, what we see here is today he's showing his disciples that there's a turn in his ministry. And what he's going to do now is he's going to begin to build the body of believers that will refer to him as their Lord and as their King and ultimately as their God. And he makes this picture of the idea of, and upon this rock, about the fact that he is the Messiah, I'm going to build my church. Now, I talked about earlier about that these temples had their foundations hewed out of a rock. And so the idea is their rock that they built their temples up on top of, the rock that they were going to use for that was basically this rock of idolatrous worship. So it would have been a false truth. It would have been based on empty idols that possessed no power. And what Jesus is saying, that upon this truth that I am the Messiah, this truth, this becomes very important here. The idea of truth, that he is the Messiah, that he's going to build his church. Now, I want you to see that the bedrock of the foundation of the church that Christ wants to build on is the truth that he is the Messiah. Now, here's an interesting thing. That word truth in the Greek means to unveil, or to reveal something that is hidden. Now, this becomes important because what you see is that if you go back to the first image I gave you about Christ was, what did he come to do? He came to explain the Father to us. He came to reveal that which was hidden to us. And so what Jesus is doing now is he's moving in that direction where he says, and upon this truth, or the idea that I'm going to reveal what has been hidden to you, that's where I'm going to build my church. Not only that, my church isn't going to be in Jerusalem. It's not going to be in the places of piety. My church is going to be built right at the very gates to hell. And so the notion and the idea here is, rather than saying that a Christian or his church is going to take this posture of being afraid of the gates of hell, and the idea that we've got to put our gates because because the gates of hell are, we got to close our gates because hell's coming at us and after us. Rather, it's saying that I'm going to plant my church in the very midst of the gates of hell. And I want to tell you that these false idols and these temples, which are the gates that enter into the idolatrous world of the abyss, will not prevail against how I'm going to penetrate it with the truth that I am the Messiah. So what Jesus is doing here is he's posturing the image of his ministry and posturing the image of his church, that his church is not to be a church that retreats from the corruption of society, but plants itself in the very middle of it. And that becomes important. Because when we understand that the church doesn't have to retreat to Jerusalem, it doesn't have to retreat to the suburbs, it doesn't have to retreat to a small town, that we begin to find that the assembly, the body of believers, and the word that is used there, the Greek word again has much more to do with a gathering and assembly of people. And so what we see is that God wants his church in the midst of darkness. The reason he wants to do that is because in the midst of that, he wants to bring the good in the presence of the bad. He wants the goodness of God. He wants the power of God. He wants the mercy of God. He wants the love of God to be revealed in a contrary society that's known for false worship and for all kinds of evil. And so Jesus, when he's standing there, he says, who do the people say that I am? Thou art the Christ. Or who do you say I am? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you, Peter, small stone. But upon this foundation, the fact that I've come to reveal the Father, I'm going to reveal the Father in the midst of great darkness. And at that point he says, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Oh, and by the way, Peter, by the way, rest of the disciples, I'm going to give you the authority of the kingdom so that you can move into these exact same kind of places. You can find yourself in the midst of this, and in the power of the Holy Spirit, by faith, what you can do is you can speak to life those things that God wants to bring to life. And by that, you can bind up the darkness, bind up the dark things. And so I give you the keys to open up the kingdom of God. And I also give you the keys to close off the kingdom of darkness. And so in this, we see these two kingdoms, the kingdom of light, the kingdom of darkness. And the idea that he's given us the authority and the power to shut down the images of darkness and to bring in the images of light. God's grace, God's redemption, God's purpose, mercy, forgiveness, his love, all of those different things, his forgiveness, his healing, his deliverance, his eternal life to those that will follow him. That's kind of the start of what the mission of the church is. But before the church can get there, it's got to begin with discipleship. So what we're going to find in the next couple of weeks is Jesus is going to prepare his disciples, which will eventually become the power bases, the authoritative apostles. He's going to begin to work in their life and to change them to his mind and understanding the things of God the way he wants them to, so that they can stand in the midst of the gates of hell without fear, faith in a God that on that truth, that he is the Messiah, is going to build his church. I hope you'll continue with me. It has a lot of ramifications for us. It actually it begs the question of what does it really mean to be a follower of Christ? It also means to ask yourself the question of what is the ecclesia of God supposed to be? What is the church supposed to be? What is the church supposed to look like? We'll cover that more in coming weeks, but I hope that today this will give you at least some food for thought as we kind of wind down the day. God bless you. If you're in the area, I would love to see you tomorrow. If not, and you're in a different town, I just want to give you a shout out and say thank you for listening and being a part of the Father's house. God bless.